Signs, Wonders, Lies. That's our title. You'll see why as we go along. Signs, Wonders, Lies. You've probably seen a couple of these reconstructed images of the temple that I've been showing throughout the sermon series. The next slide also has some. And the reason is to try to give you some idea of what was destroyed in 70 AD and how big of a deal it was. Huge deal. Imagine if this church was destroyed by an invading army. Now imagine if this church was the main Southern Baptist church. You know, it's even a bigger deal when you talk about the temple in Jerusalem. This is the center where God's presence is supposed to be especially intense, where forgiveness of sins is supposed to occur. By the way, the new temple is Jesus, because that's exactly what happens. God's presence is there, manifest, and forgiveness of sins occur in Him. That's why we don't need to rebuild this temple. We have Jesus, and He's in us. We are now the temple walking around. But the way that this whole conversation started was from a few questions the disciples asked Jesus. Because they saw the temple stones and had gold inlaid in it. And they said, Jesus, look at this. Look at this. And He said, this is all coming down. All of it. So they came privately and they said, we have some questions about that. Help us to understand. And then these questions are going to get answered in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, an apocalyptic discourse of Jesus. You guys know the idea of apocalypse is something that is veiled or hidden, now being revealed. So when we say something apocalyptic, that's what it is. This is an apocalyptic discourse. And there's a parallel passage some of you may be familiar with in Mark chapter 13. And there's also parts in Luke. And you can put these together and see a lot of what Jesus is saying about these things happening. What are these things? Temple coming down. The sign of your coming and the end of the age. And that's interesting, that end of the age causes some debate because some say this means the end of the world. Others say no, it means the end of the age, as in the end of the old covenant. Lots of discussion swirls around this passage. And you guys are blessed to have different preachers and pastors, so you've heard some different takes on some of these things. But that's okay because you're getting a good variety to understand how this text is often approached. Because there is some variety. This is Jesus' longest discussion of end things, of end time things, when you put these passages together. And since it's future, there's some elements that are veiled. In fact, what does Jesus say? No man knows the day nor the hour. No man knows the day nor the hour. That should give us a sense of humility when we approach this passage, right? I think so. But that is what is going to be discussed. Now, I've tried to simplify a little bit kind of the breakdown I had of what discussion is discussed throughout Matthew 24 to help guide us through this. So let's take a look here at this. The question is in 1 through 3, right? 4 through 14 is being discussed, the end of the age. Now again, there's some discussion about what exactly the end of the age means. Because it doesn't literally say end of the world, does it? It does say end of the age. We're not talking about that today, but a safe thing to say is 4 through 14 are about the end of the age. No doubt about that. 15 through 28 deal with the temple's destruction, the events leading up to it. Because this war that resulted in the temple's destruction actually lasted 7 years. It's sometimes simply called the Jewish War. We mainly know about it from Josephus. And guess what? It happened a generation after Jesus uttered these words. And what did Jesus say? Within a generation this will happen. Normally understood to be about 40 years, biblically speaking. And Jesus even speaks about this wicked generation. He's talking about his contemporaries. Remember those passages? This wicked generation. He's talking about y'all right now. Now, this next little section, 29 through 31, all I did is put a little trumpet there. That one is tricky. That one's real tricky. You guys are going to get to that because there are some things that might lend it to being fulfilled in 70 AD, but then there's other things that make it sound like it's when Jesus returns. So there's lots of questions there, and you guys will come to that. 70 AD also gets its own parable. In verses 32 through 35, Jesus gives a parable about the destruction of 70 AD. Basically saying you're going to know the signs. And so he gives a little parable about the teaching he just gave. Then he changes to the next element of the question, the second coming. Now this is interesting, isn't it? Because did the disciples think the Messiah was going anywhere? See, isn't it interesting to put yourself in the mindset of the disciples as they ask and hear? They don't think he's going anywhere. So to them, the word parousia, which means presence, that's the word translated as coming, is not referring to the return of Jesus. Now, we know now this refers to the second coming. You understand? Them hearing it, they weren't thinking Jesus was going anywhere to have to come back. So they are hearing this as some kind of enthronement of the Messiah, perhaps. It's very interesting when you put yourself in their position, right? Because they're not thinking, yeah, he's going to die and then go and then come back. They're not thinking that. But we know that's what happens. So in 36 through 41, he speaks of his second coming, sometimes called the second advent, the return. And then he gives a parable. Here I call it the parousia parable. Because again, parousia, or some people say parousia, no big deal either way, is just the Greek word for coming or presence. Now, having a general breakdown really helps as we navigate through this passage. But we know one thing for sure as we look at Matthew chapter 24, and today we're going to focus on verses 23 to 25. We know the temple was destroyed. This is what it looks like now. You got to dig to find it. And let me just say a little something. This is what a reconstruction of part of it may have looked like way back then. And there's people that want to rebuild this. They think we need a third temple. I just want to say something about that real quick as we do this whole series. What we're going to do at the end of the service represents Jesus' sacrifice once and for all, right? What would they be doing in this third temple if the Jews rebuild it? Killing animals all over again. But what about this? They could rebuild that temple, but it's just another building. It's a slaughterhouse if they did it. And I'm not making a political commentary on yes or no. I'm just saying, understand, spiritually speaking, this is where what used to happen in there was pointing into now. So rebuild the temple, but God ain't trying to hear it because he knows what he did in 33 AD. The Lamb, Jesus. It's important as we understand. And also, we see this, and yes, it's tragic what happened, right? In fact, Jesus said that he longed to bring in Jerusalem like a mother chick under her wings. This is what a hen would do sometimes in the midst of a fire, would protect the chicks under her wings. That's what he wanted, but he said, you would not have it. You would not have it. Rejection of Jesus. And you know what it brought? It brought destruction of the temple. When we see that pile of rubble, yes, it's tragic, but remember, it is proof of God's justice. Sometimes we wonder, is hell real? Will God punish sin? think of that temple rubble sitting there. And then ask that same question, is hell real? Will God punish sin? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. And as we look today, I want you to be guided by verse 25, where Jesus says, see, I have told you beforehand. That's probably the most important verse today. See, I have told you beforehand. Because he's saying, what I say will come to pass. Jesus predicted this would come down. It came to pass. But let's go back a little first and look at verse 23. Verse 23. Then if anyone says to you, so it seems like Jesus is talking about, before the temple is destroyed, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, translated in English as Christ, because in Greek it's Christos. Here is the Messiah, or in Hebrew Mashiach, simply means anointed one, the one on whom the Spirit of the Lord will rest. There he is, or here he is. What's Jesus say? Do not believe it. He's saying, my return is not at the same time as the temple's destruction. He is disambiguating those events by saying it's not when this happens. Do you see? Now, why might Jews be particularly inclined during this time of Roman destruction, pending and then happening, to say, the Messiah is here? When you have a great need, when you're going through great pain and suffering, you want that way out. And that's why when you're in great pain and suffering, I'm talking to us now, you have to be especially careful about what you believe, because you are extra vulnerable to wanting solutions that may not be from God. And so much of our sin is exactly that, isn't it? This will make you feel better. This person, this thing, this place. This will help your problem. And sometimes even religiously this happens. I'm poor, I'm broke, but the preacher on TV said if I give $33.33, it'll be multiplied threefold within 3 years. But I got to keep on doing it every third day. Just, they like to play these numbers games. That's what I'm parroting there. And that's like playing the prosperity gospel lottery, Maybe, maybe not, but that's not what giving's about. When we give at the end here, you're not doing it to get rich, I hope. You're doing it to be faithful as he gave. You're not paying Jesus back for the cross. Some of you think that, well, I'm paying. No. You are being like Jesus. You're not paying him back for the cross. You can't do that with your money. But you are being like him where you give of yourself of what you have generously. You're imitating Christ in your giving. Understand? And when we are down, we're especially prone to false messiahs. I know I can bring up Joseph Smith right now. We have Mormon neighbors. We love them. But Joseph Smith never claimed literally to be the Messiah, but he might as well have been. New prophet, new revelation, new book. He even said, Joseph Smith said this. That's the founder of the Mormon Church, in case you guys don't know who I'm talking about. We call him Joe. Joe said, Christ's followers, they abandoned him. Mine have stuck with me. Because he was bragging, Joseph Smith, that he had started a work greater than Jesus had. Now, the Mormon Church has a great enemy, though, that's causing it to lose a lot of numbers. You know what it is? It starts with an I and ends with the internet. The internet, because facts and information are destroying the Mormon Church. No joke. They're like, wait a minute, our prophet looked through a hat to get the translation of Reformed Egyptian, a language that doesn't exist, that supposedly was on golden plates, that was buried in a hill by Native Americans who were actually lost Israelites in a hill in New York right outside of his neighborhood? That's wild. By the way, that's what the story is of the Book of Mormon. But let's not just think about guys like him. Think about the false messiahs in our own life that we erect. This person will save me. It could be a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a family member, an employer. It could be a politician. We look to them for salvation. If only I had them in my life. If only I knew them. That's a sort of a false Messiah, a false Christ. And just like we have Mormon neighbors, we have Roman Catholic neighbors, and we love them too, but they are looking to Rome for a sort of a false Messiah. The vicar of Christ, he calls himself. He says, "Kiss my ring." The Pope, who sort of acts as an artificial stand-in for Jesus. You know one of his titles, one of his nicknames is Holy Father? Nah. There's all kinds of false Christ, pseudo-Christoi around us. During their day, they had a guy named Simon Bar Giora. When you hear Bar, it means son of. So Bar Abbas is son of the Father. Bar Jonah. Simon Bar Giora was looked at as a king. This is during the insurrection that took place in the 60s and 70s in Jerusalem. Eventually, the Romans got him, and they paraded him around the streets, and they called him the enemy's general. But did you know the Jews, when they rebelled against Rome, couldn't even agree with each other? They had 3 different leaders of 3 different factions. And really, you could even say 4, and they all disagreed about how best to rebel. And the 4th faction said, don't rebel, let's have peace with Rome. So they were fighting each other, even in the temple before Rome came in. John of Giscala was another one. Josephus, a Jewish historian who was there for this event in 70 A.D., speaks of other imposters, and one named Theudius. And some of these imposters, sort of false Christs that they were being erected in the lead up to the destruction of Jerusalem, we don't even know their name, we just know the Roman who defeated them. Interesting about Jesus, compare these names appear to Jesus. He got killed too by the Romans, didn't he? But why does he have a movement? Those guys don't. Why is that? Because he rose again. That's why we don't just mourn his death. At the end, what are we going to do? Celebrate his death. Because he didn't stay dead. He rose again, and that means we could experience new life as well. That's a huge difference. Have you ever thought how strange this is in a way? Why are we happy about our leader getting killed? Because he rose again. He conquered death. He substituted. That's why. Those guys didn't do that. People put faith and hope in them, and now we don't even know their name. We just know the Roman general who beat them. Because you'll get people, sometimes skeptics, there was a lot of messiahs during Jesus' day. Yeah. Where's their movement? Back then, if your messiah got killed, guess what you would go do? Find yourself another messiah. Why didn't the disciples do that? Because they know he conquered the grave. He rose again. They saw him. They heard him. They touched him. They knew. Huge difference. Huge difference. So, as we look, again, at this sort of breakdown, yes, in Matthew 24, in this passage we're at today, we're mainly talking about in the lead up to 70 A.D. But I believe that there's sort of a pattern in Scripture. Just as there will be false messiahs and false Christs arise in that window of time, in the inter-Advent period, that's before Jesus comes back again, there will be false messiahs and false Christs and false prophets who arise. Can I tell you about one of them? I went to Brooklyn, February of 2025. I was in Brooklyn, New York. And I was a place called Imperial Parkway. And there's a community there of Jewish people, and the group is called Chabad. Chabad, it's an acronym. They're a certain sect of Orthodox Jews, and a lot of them think their Rebbe is the Messiah. Rebbe means rabbi. I got a picture of me with the Messiah, in fact. That's me in Brooklyn, and I'm pointing to some stickers that his followers put up. There's a close-up of the Rebbe. And look what it says. What's that say? Messiah is here. Now, do all Jews believe this? No. Do all Orthodox Jews believe this? No. Do all the people in Chabad believe this? No. But do a large percentage of people in Chabad think this guy is the Mashiach? Yes. So much so, they put up stickers all over Brooklyn telling you so. This says in the top left, I know you can't see it, but I'm gonna show you what this says here in a second. Long live our master, teacher and Rebbe king, Messiah Mashiach, forever and ever. He is dead. And it seems he didn't even claim to be the Messiah. That's what's interesting. But his followers did. And that happens, doesn't it? That's why Jesus said, if someone says, look, there he is. Did you notice in Jesus' warning? He doesn't even say if someone says, look, I am. He says, what if they say, look, there he is? That's what they're doing. And this isn't the only one. We're not going to pick on Chabad. In fact, they let me go visit their school, and they were very friendly, very nice, very kind people. And in fact, this man seemed to be a nice guy, except for the fact that he thought Christianity was essentially a mental disease. This is the way he thinks of Christianity. Something is wrong with you if you believe it. You probably have some kind of mental malfunction. And his followers call him the Messiah. But just like the Jerusalem temple, all movements built on something else besides Jesus will crumble. They will fall. They will be like those walls. Because what is Jesus? The solid rock. He says, build your foundation on me. You don't have to follow the Rebbe in Brooklyn to be building on a false foundation. You, right now, here today, this morning with us, can be building your life upon your retirement plan. Be building your life upon family. Your gifts, your leisure, your skills, your know-how, your hobbies. It's sinking sand. Whatever else you build your life upon. You know it's true. Jesus is saying, look, your boat has holes in it. You're sinking. No, I'm not. Come over here. This boat has no holes in it. I'm fine. That's what happens. That's why Jesus says, have I not told you these things? I've told you beforehand. But there's still people following after false messiahs. He's even on the side of buses in Brooklyn. Long live our master, teacher, and Rebbe Mashiach forever. Now, that's not a city bus or something. That's like one of their vans. They go around and they wrap Tefillin for people. You know what this is? They wrap the leather straps that are connected to the Torah scroll and things like that. False messiahs all over. They were back then, they're now. And now you can be a messiah with 10 followers and survive off of them because the internet brings all the folks together. And you know what? You may say, that's stupid. I would never do that. Some of you probably have members of family who are in cults, don't you? Some of you probably used to be in a cult for a little bit or a really cultic church. Some of you have been deceived spiritually, haven't you? Christian, don't ever think, well, that's just them over there. I have seen people in church for 40 years be deceived by false religions. It happens. We have to stay on our guard till we die. Till you take your last breath, you must be vigilant. That doesn't sound fun. Welcome to reality. What does Jesus say in verse 24? For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. They're going to be coming. They're going to be coming up. And they might even do some magic tricks. They might even say they know the name of a dead relative. They might do stuff you can't explain. Well, it must be from God. No. Just because you can't explain it, you can say that's a sign, that's a wonder, but that's off. Signs, wonders, lies. Don't think when someone does magic tricks, and you understand what I mean by that, therefore they're sent from God. We can make that mistake. I know some hyper-charismatic friends of mine, and I'll say, look at this Benny Hinn guy. Well, but one time he healed this person, and see. Look at this Todd White guy. Well, one time he healed this person, see. Look at this Creflo Dollar guy. Well, one time my friend listened to him, and then they got a Bentley, see. Signs, wonders, lies. It doesn't matter. Don't give me your anecdotal evidence. That's what that's called, anecdotal evidence. We cannot be fooled. Jesus is our boss, and he told us to watch out and stay alert. If you're not a Christian here today, You essentially are a victim of this in some way in your life. You are following a false prophet or false Christ. Oh, I just follow myself. Bingo. That's the false Christ in your life, the false Messiah you've erected. It's you. Look in the mirror. Just wait till you let yourself down really bad. But you probably have already done that. So why are you trusting yourself on eternal matters? You don't know about them. Jesus does. And those things he said happen. False prophets also arise in between the time of 33 and 70 false prophets. In fact, you guys remember Jeremiah 14 that was read today? Talked about false prophets during the prior destruction of Jerusalem. People will love to come along. Next slide. They'll love to come along and say, that guy, he's like an alarmist. He's just trying to freak you out and sell fear. Don't worry. Just do this. You'll be okay. Okay, yeah. That's what they'll say. When we raise the specter of judgment and hell, those people were zealots, really excited about their religion and stuff. Actually, this is the truth right here. Settle down. Settle down. Jesus says that they'll come, and that's what they love to do. False prophets versus the true prophet. Even in the book of Acts, there's false prophets that pop up. Remember a guy named Simon Magus in Acts chapter 8? Remember Elmius, I think is how you say his name, Elymas, in Acts 13. There's examples even in the book of Acts after Jesus leaves. These are representative instances of these false claimants to supernatural powers. And you can have supernatural powers, but not from there, from there. Remember the demon-possessed girl who was able to somehow know future elements, followed Paul around? Do you remember this story? And she would talk to Paul, and Paul finally cast the demon out of her. Somehow she had some ability to know the future. The scripture says that. Remember the court magicians in the book of Exodus? They cast down their rods and it turned into snakes. They could imitate some of the miracles of Moses. Not all, some. How? I don't know. But I know it's signs, wonders, lies. Back in the day, they exposed some of these TV preacher guys. Let me show you one of these tricks. They would have a lady in the front. She'd be taking people's names, signing them in for a conference with a televangelist. She had an earpiece. And then when her hubby was up there on the stage, she would say, third row, fourth seat. She has a back issue. She asked for prayer. It's on the right side of her. Oh, I'm hearing a word from the Lord. Right over there, miss, do you have a back issue? This is a real thing. They made a documentary about it. Recently, a televangelist guy was exposed by, he would find out who was coming to the meeting, and then they would do social media research on people and act like they knew something about them. They were getting a word from the Lord. They just looked at their Facebook profile. Signs, wonders, lies. Signs, wonders, lies. Deuteronomy 13 talks about this. Way back in the days of Moses, Moses warned the Israelites. Verse 1, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or a wonder that he tells you comes to pass, notice it says, tells you comes to pass. It actually happens. And if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. So what he said actually came to pass, but it's to get you over here. We got to be very careful. If someone says, well, how did it happen? How did they know? How did they do that? I don't know. But I know signs, wonders, lies. That's what I know. There are prophets that arose during the days of Josephus before 70 A.D., and they would say they were the prophet foretold by Moses, because Moses talked about prophets. And in fact, in Deuteronomy 18, he talks about a prophet who will rise after him, who will be greater than he is. This is ultimately a prophecy of Jesus. Lots of people have tried to claim to be that prophet. Muhammad, his followers claim that he is the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 18. You know what, though? It says, arise from your brethren. That means he has to be a Hebrew. Sorry, Muhammad, not you. Besides, you're a false prophet. Sorry, not sorry. For false Christs, verse 24 says, and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Yes, I've got it underlined. We're going to briefly talk about this. The elect. It's in the Bible. What do you want me to do? Let me show you, even from Matthew, where the concept of the elect appears. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 14, Jesus says, many are called, but few are chosen. That's interesting, because he doesn't say few answer. He says few are chosen. Most of us, growing up, hearing about Israel, had no problem understanding that God chose Abraham out of the Ur of Chaldees. He chose him. And then he didn't choose Ishmael, did he? He chose Isaac, didn't he? And then he didn't choose Esau, did he? He chose Jacob, didn't he? We have no problem understanding God's selection. But then if we hear, you were chosen, church, we're like, that doesn't sound right. I'd rather make my own decision. Your own decision will lead you to hell. That's why you're called the elect. It's not that the devil cast a vote and then you cast a vote. It's that God has elected. And yes, that means selected. And yes, that means pre-directed. Oh, don't let me preach this morning. Many are called, but few are chosen. Meaning a lot of y'all hear the gospel, but only some are his sheep. Matthew 25:34. Notice I'm just in the book of Matthew. Look what Jesus says in Matthew 25:34. This is a shocking statement that he says. This is in light of Matthew's teaching on the idea of the elect. Look at this. This is about the final judgment. Here's what Jesus says the king will say. Then the king will say to those on his right, so these are the sheep, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom. Okay, sounds like he's talking about Christians, right? Listen to this. Prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you since way back then before you existed. Ooh. That's why when we come to Matthew 24, it says these false prophets and these false Christs are going to try really hard to deceive the elect, but it's not going to happen. Even if you look at the Greek, we're not going to do all that first-class conditional, third-class conditional. We're not going to do that this morning, but the Greek shows it's impossible. The elect will not be deceived. The elect will not be deceived in an ultimate and final way. And that's why if you're here today after being deceived, you know what it probably means? It probably means you're one of the 100. One of the 100? Remember the parable of the sheep, and the master goes to get that one sheep. The 99 he leaves behind, and he goes get that one. Some of you, Jesus had to pull out of some stuff. That's who he is. And then even at the end of the section in Matthew 24, it says that the messengers are going to go out to all the world. It says they're going to gather the elect from the four winds. The four winds, that means from all over the globe. That's the point by that. The four winds, all compass points, understand? Going to gather the elect. When you share the gospel with somebody, the only reason they will come and agree, and it doesn't happen instantly, does it? Usually not, is if the Father is drawing them to the Son. How do you know? Because that's what John 6 says. So our job is to be instruments in the hands of the Redeemer. We witness, we share. In the New Testament, the elect refers to the church. It's all believers. Yes, it's synonymous with chosen. All faithful believers, Jew and Gentile alike. If you're not in Christ, it doesn't make sense to say you're chosen. Honestly, it does not. God's purpose for people, that means for you and you if you're a believer, is not an afterthought. He didn't say, let me see what they're going to do. See what who would do. They didn't exist yet. That also means if God's going to see what we're going to do, that would mean he didn't have information, had to look down the hall of time and gain new information. That means God's incomplete because he already didn't know something. Uh-oh. But God's omniscient. You know what omniscient means? It means he knows all true thoughts at once, simultaneously. Not in successive order like we do. That means all at once. That's his wisdom. That's a lot to take in, but that's who he is. This is settled before the foundation of the world. Before the beginning of the world, God predestined. You don't like that word, but it's in the Bible. It has to do with the elect. Certain people to receive his gift of salvation. I didn't write it. I'm just up here this morning reading it. Now, guys, Christians are allowed to have some disagreements about these things, right? I hope so. We can still eat afterwards and love each other. We're going to have some of these disagreements about the ins and outs of this till Jesus comes back. But at least be willing to consider ideas that may be foreign or different to you if they're scriptural based. Notice, preaching against false teachers, that you got to ask, if it's in the Bible, what do I do with it even if I don't like the way it sounds at first? Because sometimes that's how you feel. That's sometimes how we feel. Signs, wonders, lies, that we look at Matthew 24, 23 through 25. The main point is to bring us back to the fact that Jesus tells the truth. Because what does he say? He told us the temple was going to be destroyed. It was destroyed. That's what you got left. It was destroyed. You know what's interesting about this? The Roman general told the Roman soldiers, don't destroy the temple. Yes, he was going to beat up those rebellious folks. Yeah. They were going to get slaughtered. He didn't want to go above what was necessary, though. But the soldiers did not listen. And in fact, you know who started the destruction of the temple? The Jewish zealots themselves. They said, this isn't going to fall into the hands of the Romans. So when the Romans got there, according to reports, it was already burning. They're like, let's just add some fuel to that fire. And they did so much so, they wanted to get the gold out of the inlays because there was gold in between the cracks. So that's why every stone was torn apart. Everything gone. And you can go to Italy today and see something called the Arch of Titus. And it shows Roman soldiers carrying in a menorah as the trophy of the proof of their destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. But what does Jesus say in verse 25? See, I have told you beforehand. He is trustworthy. He doesn't give false prophecies. He has told us beforehand. He said he was going to die on a cross. He did. He said he was going to rise again. He did. He told us the temple was going to be destroyed. It was. And he tells us our life will be in ruins unless we're in him. It will. Now, I'm going to have to skip this next slide. It's more verses to be lined up to talk about the elect, but I think I've already shaken up enough feathers today, rattled enough cages, so maybe another time if you have me back. But I want to close on this, the fact that Jesus says, I have told you beforehand. That 70 AD prophecy wasn't the only prophecy he made, was it? He told his disciples again and again, I will die. And in fact, in the Gospel of Matthew, he said that the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. And that is what we will now celebrate. The fact that the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. Let us pray.